environmental impact of this disaster is likely to have been very, very modest. Everything we can see at the moment suggests that the overall environmental impact of this will be very, very modest.
What God took millions of years to create, man has destroyed entirely.
BP lied to me, they lied to the people of the Gulf, and they lied to their shareholders, and they lied to all Americans. They lie.
I want the rest of the United States to wake up and get involved. We need our fellow American citizens now.
Yeah, don't worry, the oil that the boom doesn't absorb, the birds will. Everything's fine, BP. They got it. Mother Nature's got this one.
We will fight this spill with everything we've got for as long as it takes. We will make BP pay for the damage their company has caused.
I will not be satisfied until the environment has been restored, no matter how long it takes.
I grew up in Louisiana. I went to school here. Today, 5 years of research shows that the Gulf is coming back faster than predicted.
You know, I'd like my life back.
As a result of the massive cleanup operation that's already taken place, a recent report by our top scientists found that the majority of oil has now evaporated or dispersed. And the dispersed oil is in the process of degrading.
They brought a lot of sand in today. At least it's white sand instead of orange dirt like they've been bringing. The water is horrific. Very, very brown, very full of oil, very full of silt, very stinky. Smells very strong of chemicals and oil.
For BP, all bets were now off.
Spray on. Sprayed on.
Since the early days of the crisis, BP had been spraying dispersants onto oil on the surface of the ocean. It is standard procedure for fighting spills. But as they struggled to get a grip of the blowout, BP began considering using dispersants very differently.
We done?
We're done. 1,700 gallons almost.
I received an email from a colleague in the industry, works for another oil and gas company, and told me that he had been talking to some of their scientists, and one of them had said that if we applied dispersants at the source, down at the well, on the seabed, that they would be tremendously more effective.
Doug Suttle's idea was audacious and controversial. Using dispersants underwater had never been done before. It required the government's approval. Dispersants can be toxic. No tests had ever been done on how they would affect the deep ocean.
We would never have been able to receive a permit to inject dispersant in oil down at 5,000 feet to study, to track how it moves. It's just a risk we wouldn't take for the sake of science.
Testing took place in the real world. Thousands of gallons of dispersants were pumped into the oil flowing from the well. On day 26 of the crisis, the government gave BP the go-ahead to use dispersants at depth.
I think it was a big leap in the dark. It was a big leap of faith that there would be no impact.
Dr. Samantha Joy is an oceanographer who has studied the ecosystem of the Gulf of Mexico for many years. She has been investigating the impact of the oil spill on the ocean. Dr. Joy was flabbergasted by the decision to use dispersants a mile down.
There's a lot of unknowns with dispersants, and the tests that have been done on dispersants with various organisms are very limited. This is a large system. It's a very complicated food web, lots of different organisms. It's impossible to predict how these various components of the natural system are going to respond to dispersants.
By the end of the crisis, BP would use nearly 2 million gallons of dispersants. Nearly half that amount was underwater. The company says it doesn't know what the long-term consequences will be.
And so even though there was an agreement in late May that the EPA led that it would be used only rarely, as the weeks and months went by, it turned out that it was used on an almost daily basis. And that's why we have to ensure that internal bleeding inside of this ocean is monitored very closely to make sure that we understand what the ramifications are of having this unprecedented scientific experiment be conducted.
I think that there's going to be a lot of impact from the spill in the deep water and deep sediments, and I think there might be a lot of gas in the water.
Her team tracked a plume about 20 miles long, 3 miles wide, and hundreds of feet below the surface.
The gas concentrations are outrageously high. We measure concentrations up to 100,000 times what we typically see in the Gulf of Mexico.
Joy says methane gas could create more dead zones in the Gulf by choking off deep water ecosystems. Marine microbes feast on the oil, but in the process they suck up most of the oxygen, killing plants and animals.
And these ecosystems, the one thing that they need that could be taken away by this oil spill is oxygen.
Joy is also troubled by the dispersants used to break up the oil.
You've already got a big problem. You're spewing oil and gas into the system. Why do you amplify that by adding this unknown?
All the researchers say they felt a real sense of urgency when the sampling bottles reached the deck.
It was pretty much, all units to stations, let's get the water, let's start analyzing.
I can't believe this water that looks clear smells so much like gas.
One night, one rescued bird put the devastation into perspective for the team.
Animals like that bird, whales and sea turtles and fish, and every organism that inhabits the Gulf of Mexico is being exposed to an atrocity.
It's being hailed by some as a bathtub ring in the Gulf of Mexico. It's made of oily remnants from the 2010 BP offshore oil disaster, and its reach stretches to the size of Rhode Island. The findings come from a new report by UC Santa Barbara scientist David Valentine, and estimates about 10 million gallons of oil has settled at the bottom of the Gulf near the site of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. The pattern is like a shadow of the tiny oil droplets that were initially trapped at ocean depths around 3,500 feet. Some combination of chemistry, biology, and physics ultimately caused those droplets to rain down another 1,000 feet to rest on the seafloor. Valentine's study surveyed an underwater area of 1,250 square miles and collected 3,000 samples. However, on Monday, BP refuted the study in a statement to NBC. It claimed the authors dramatically overestimated the impact and failed to identify the source of oil. Valentine's tests only looked for a single compound in the water, oil, which is found in many natural oil deposits beneath the ocean. BP suggests this could show a false positive and doesn't prove it was oil from the Deepwater Horizon incident.
Dr. Samantha Joy, one of the leading experts on oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico, who has led the research looking at the impacts of the BP disaster, was my guide. And when we got down there, really the most stark thing to report was that there's basically nothing there. It's a moonscape. Basically, all of the sea life that could get out of the way of the oil got out of the way of the oil. Everything that couldn't was just, in Dr. Joy's words, nuked and killed. And there is a blanket of oil as much as 2 inches thick, covering 3,000 square feet of the ocean floor.
Well, BP insists most of the crude oil that leaked in the Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion dissolved or evaporated before it reached land and did not settle on the ocean floor. In February, Politico published an article titled, "No, BP didn't ruin the Gulf," that was written by BP Senior Vice President of Communications, Jeff Morrell. He wrote, quote, "Natural oil seeps release up to the equivalent of nearly 6 Exxon Valdez spills in the Gulf each year, and microbes in the Gulf have adapted over time to feast on oil." Morrell also noted the spill occurred in deep water and, quote, "more than 40 miles from shore in a temperate climate. That allowed a lot of oil to dissolve, evaporate, deteriorate, or be physically removed before it reached land." Antonia, could you respond to that?
Well, my article responds to it really well, so let me do the short version because there's so much to unpack there. So the first thing is, yes, there's naturally occurring seeps that exist in the Gulf of Mexico. This is a teeny tiny bit of oil across the 9th largest body of water in the world, and it seeps out over millennia, and natural environments do exist around them, and they're actually quite beautiful. But that is such a small amount in comparison to the huge, momentous, enormous shock of 170 million gallons of oil being released at once at the bottom of the ocean floor. There's absolutely no comparison. But he's right that there is such a thing as naturally occurring microbes that eat oil. There's a number of problems, though. The first thing is microbes did eat some of the oil, but they only ate what they could, which means that, according to Dr. Joy, they left about 30 million barrels still behind, which is the equivalent of 3 Exxon Valdez's. But what they left behind is what they didn't want to eat, which is also the most toxic part of the oil. And that most toxic part of the oil is what remains on the bottom of the ocean floor. In addition, the Corexit, the dispersant that BP just expelled into the Gulf of Mexico, Dr. Joy found, is actually a deterrent which kept away the microbes that would have eaten more oil. So the Corexit, in addition to being, so the Corexit is toxic, the oil is toxic, and studies have found that the combination of the two is 50 times more toxic than either alone.
An Exxon report some years ago showed that the Corexit is actually 4 times more toxic than the crude oil itself.
Studies have shown on silverfish and on shrimp specifically that Corexit is exponentially more dangerous than other dispersants that are available out there.
We are using a product that has low toxicity.
released a new report today on the dangers of dispersants used during the BP oil spill and cleanup. The report shows while the dispersants can break down the oil, they also destroy the ground floor of the food chain. Local 15's Tammy Braze has more.
Even the smallest fish need something smaller to eat, and that something comes from phytoplankton.
The phytoplankton are naturally supplying the carbon and energy for food chains, for fish.
Dr. Rob Condon is a marine scientist at Dauphin Island Sea Lab. When his team tested chemical dispersants in the water, like the ones used by BP, something alarming happened.
By applying dispersants to break up the oil, it essentially, the phytoplankton become non-existent in the food chain.
It's groundbreaking news, as the chemicals have almost never been studied before. Other scientists who worked on the project say it could have dramatic consequences.
It could be removing the link between the really small things and the bigger things, and that means it's cutting off the food supply.
Cutting off a food supply for an already strained Gulf. Dr. Alice Ortman goes so far as to say in their samples the dispersants actually had worse effects than the oil itself. The chemical's long-term effects on larger sea life have yet to be seen.
I don't think that we as scientists or the public should be complacent. We need to fully understand what the consequences are of our practices.
Local 15's Tammy Braze reporting.
Our birds are laying out there. We have 70% of the migratory birds coming to Louisiana's estuaries every year. You know what they're landing in? Contaminated water with dispersants and oil.
Scary things about this is that the birds are still on these islands coming in here feeding. So you can just imagine the contamination that takes place within the wildlife 5 years after the fact.
Mentioned this before the break. There are new findings by government scientists tonight that show the BP oil disaster has left parts of the local dolphin population in the Gulf of Mexico damaged and sick. Our chief environmental affairs correspondent, Ann Thompson, who spent so much time covering this story, is with us here tonight. Ann, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. This news comes from Louisiana's Barataria Bay, and it is not good news. Federal scientists say the dolphin population there is severely ill compared to dolphins elsewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, and their health problems are consistent with exposure to oil. You'll remember that Barataria Bay was one of the areas hit hardest and longest by the BP spill. We went out with government scientists last summer when they conducted their tests on the dolphins. A total of 32 were examined, and the most pervasive problem they found were abnormally low levels of two crucial hormones. This adrenal insufficiency can lead to weight loss, heart and kidney failure, and ultimately death. In fact, several of the dolphins were underweight, and one washed up dead in January, showing severe signs of malnutrition. Ultrasounds revealed moderate to severe lung disease. The dolphins' lungs just won't fill with air properly, the scientists say. And several had liver disease, which has been found in studies on animals ingesting oil.
The Ed Show. Thanks for watching tonight. A new study out from NOAA is linking the Deepwater Horizon oil spill to dolphin deaths in the Gulf of Mexico. Between June of 2010 and December 2012, over 1,000 dead dolphins washed up along the Gulf shore. It's over 4 times the usual death rate of dolphins. Scientists found lung and adrenal lesions in the dead dolphins. The study also found these lesions are consistent with damaged marine mammals usually sustained from oil exposure. Researchers said the timing, location, and nature of the detected lesions support that contaminants from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill caused these lesions and contributed to the high numbers of dolphin deaths. BP is pushing back on the study. They released a statement saying the data we have seen thus far, including the new study from NOAA, do not show that oil from the Deepwater Horizon accident caused an increase in dolphin mortality. Over 200 million gallons of oil gushed from the ocean floor for 87 days back in 2010. The fact BP thinks this had nothing to do with abnormal dolphin deaths over the last 2 years is flat out absurd. For more, let me bring in PJ Hahn, Pelican Coast Environmental Consulting. Mr. Hahn, good to have you with us tonight. How significant is this study and this statement that has come out from NOAA as you see it?
Ed, I think it's very clear that what the study does show, there were problems with the dolphins, with marine mammals in the Gulf. And it's clear that this study, they've had very excellent peer review. I've gone through the report. And it shows once again BP's denial of causing any damage whatsoever to the Gulf Coast. BP dumped 4.9 million barrels of oil into the Gulf, and they chased it down with nearly 2 million gallons of Corexit. You know that's not going to bear well to the marine life along the Gulf Coast.
So is there any doubt in your mind the spill had to do with these dolphin deaths? I mean, this is conclusive as you see it.
That is very conclusive. And, you know, it's no surprise, I don't think, to anyone that lives or works along the Gulf. During the oil spill, we started seeing a lot of dead dolphins showing up. They even, early on in the spill, even had what they call the dolphin program, going out looking for dead and sick dolphins. The problem was it was canceled when we were finding too many dead and sick dolphins. So the remarks by BP to just totally deny and brush away this report is sickening. I can't understand why BP continues to do what they're doing. Obviously, they found Baghdad Bob to do their PR for them and just deny that any of this stuff is happening when it's clearly... Yes, sir? Mr.
Hahn, is this pretty much consistent with their reaction to any bad news that comes out of the Gulf?
It's absolutely consistent, and unfortunately, bad timing on their part. They try to release a report saying the Gulf is back and everything is fine, and then we found large tar mats off the coast of East Grand Terre. So obviously, their PR people and the folks that are calling the shots are just fumbling the ball constantly. And I think most of the people along the Gulf Coast just want them to admit, look, you did some damage. Accidents happen. This was a terrible accident. Now, what can we do to help to fix the problem? But instead, it's time and time again denial, lies, outright lies. But they lied from the very beginning. They lied from the day the oil spill happened, as far as the amount of oil that had left the wellhead to the amount of equipment that was being used and mobilized along the Gulf Coast.
And we can only speculate other fishes being, of course, species being affected, not just the dolphin. From an environmental standpoint, a scientific standpoint, what are the chances of the dolphin rebounding in the Gulf, or is that not a possibility? Do you think we'll see the population back to what it was?
Well, you know, that's hard to tell, and only time where it's going to tell for us, because you and I were out there, and before we used to be able to ride out there and see so many dolphins. They love to go up alongside the boats. You see them all the time when you're out there, and I think when last time you and I went out there, we could count on one hand the number of dolphins we saw, and that's really unusual. I really believe only time will tell. There's been a lot of damage to the Gulf. There's still a lot of oil out there that has not been collected. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, what we're seeing with the dolphins. I think the dolphins, unfortunately, are going to be the canary in the coal mine to other species. The tuna, the Sargassian grass that was destroyed during this spill, that's where the tuna generally have their eggs and spawn. There's just a number of things, the turtles that go through that area. Just a number of problems that we're having that I think this is only the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, PJ Hahn, Pelican Coast Consulting, with us tonight here on The Ed Show. Appreciate your time, PJ. Thanks so much.
Scientists say government red tape is keeping them from trying to figure out why more dolphins are migrating to where they don't belong and dying because of it. The Institute for Marine Mammal Studies says this year there have been an increase in dolphins migrating into rivers and bayous, places where these saltwater animals can't survive. Danielle Thomas joins us from the newsroom tonight with a story that's new at 6:30.
IMMF's officials say of the 31 dolphins found dead on the Mississippi coast so far this year, 6 have showed signs of freshwater damage. Meanwhile, another 6 or 7 have been spotted out swimming in fresh water. Scientists say they don't know why these animals are heading into dangerous territory, but they suspect something major has happened in their natural habitat. A viewer took this video after seeing an unusual sight, a dolphin swimming in the Chautauqua River.
Well, this year we've had a very serious problem with the dolphins being found in freshwater. We're seeing them in Back Bay, we're seeing them in Chautauqua River, we're seeing them in bayous like Davis Bayou. Their skin is their protection, just like our skin, and when they go into freshwater it starts peeling off. And when it peels off, bacteria and fungi invade it, and then it eventually dies. We would like to rescue these animals. However, the government doesn't want us to intervene unless the animal is very, very sick, but then there is no point in rescuing it when it is too sick.
The oil temporarily tainted the waters where the endangered Kemp's Ridley turtles swim and eat. Some wonder if that's why nesting numbers in Texas that were growing before the spill are now plummeting.
When that trajectory changed and we saw the declines in 2013 and then in 2014, it was very disappointing.
BP suggests record cold temperatures may be to blame, but Shaver says that would not impact adult turtles.
And every organism that inhabits the Gulf of Mexico is being exposed to an atrocity.